Hey guys, Razorblade Mango here, and today I'm going to be giving my long overdue thoughts on CD Projekt Red's latest game, Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, uh, so I feel like this video is equivalent to me investigating a crime scene after everyone has already gawked at it, looked at the evidence, and speculated as to what the hell happened. This video is here just for the sake of it. The fact that I haven't covered Cyberpunk, the game itself, on the channel yet. So, look, we all kind of know what happened with Cyberpunk 2077, but I feel compelled to make a video talking about it because, for me, it's one of the more fascinating misfires in recent memory. So, first of all, a note about the footage that you're seeing. I'm using gameplay from the PS4 version running on a PS5. Whenever I tried capturing gameplay on PC, for some reason, OBS kept butchering the footage into an unwatchable mess and making it look more buggy and messy than it really is. And I didn't want to misrepresent how the game ran for me on PC, so I'm using much more stable PS5 footage, if you can believe that. What I want to do with Cyberpunk is mainly I want to talk about the game's issues outside of the horrible technical state it was released in. Because to me, those problems are obvious, like blindingly obvious, that this game was rushed to market and it just looks terrible from a tech standpoint. Not graphics, but optimization, bugginess. It's horrendous. I played on a decent PC and ran into an incredibly extensive list of issues, big and small. And what I ultimately want to do is take this game down a peg or two, because I really don't understand how any of these game critics and YouTube influencers could play this game and reasonably say it's anything special based on what's objectively here. Because I think Cyberpunk 2077 is a creative mess. It's this big Frankenstein's monster of a behemoth that CDPR lost complete control of. To me, it's really obvious that CDPR did not know when to rein it in as far as ideas and ambitious concepts, and a lot of its gameplay and story and thematic elements just come across as half-baked. It's another one of these games that's a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Now, does that mean I dislike Cyberpunk 2077 as a whole? No. I think it can be a good game. Hell, it can even be a very good one at times. I just think most people aren't noticing or willing to see what it actually is, a deeply flawed creative mess. However, at the heart of this deeply flawed creative mess, there is something compelling there. When the game isn't actively fighting against your enjoyment and patience, there is something fun about Cyberpunk 2077 at its core. Mainly, it's the strong writing and the entertaining characters that are keeping this house of cards standing. There are also some gigantic spikes in quality when you play one of the game's handful of truly spectacular side quests. There are some side quests in this game that just blew me away when I played them, particularly that one. And if you've played Cyberpunk, you know what I mean when I say that side quest is fantastic and disturbing and thought-provoking, and I absolutely adored it. The problem is you just have to deal with a lot of the game's bullshit to see and appreciate the good stuff that's actually here. So, alright, let's get into the deep flaws. Let's talk about the supposed immersiveness of this game, and I put immersiveness in quotes. I can't tell you how many times I've read or heard a game critic say that Cyberpunk's world is, again, to put it in quotes, immersive. Night City is one of the least immersive worlds I've seen in recent memory. I mean, at a first glance, I can understand being overwhelmed by the game's visuals and art design, especially if you're playing on a super high-end PC that can handle things like 1440p or 4K at 60 frames with ray tracing on. It really does look quite amazing in certain areas. And I'll give the game this: when you're driving past everything and you're not interacting with it, the illusion of a living, breathing place is kind of sort of convincing, but that illusion is shattered when you actually take the time to explore Night City on foot and try to interact with everything. That's when you realize how limited and almost like it has this weird look but don't touch kind of vibe to it. And it's just really not interactive or immersive at all. And look, as much as I bag on Ubisoft, rightfully so, for its boring copy and paste world design, I'll give them their due. Some of the titles they've released over the past few years, like Watch Dogs 2 and the very recent and very good Immortals Phoenix Rising, like compared to those games, like those games offer far more compelling worlds to explore that hold up when it comes to discovery and examining the little details and little nooks and crannies you can find. Night City has surface level immersion. It's exploring the city yields disappointing results when you see how shallow and poorly implemented things are. And it's like things like boring NPCs, outdated AI and pathfinding, a terrible GTA-like wanted system, the lack of multiple explorable buildings, and a lot more. And a lot has already been said about the NPCs. A lot has been said about the cops popping up out of nowhere when you wave a gun around. And yeah, it does not look good. It looks really bad. And all of these little things build up over time into making you feel isolated from this place that's supposed to be an overwhelming, bustling metropolis. And like I said, the NPCs are just so disappointing, and they stumble around doing and saying the same shit over and over again and never react to your actions in a way that's mildly believable. I don't even think most of them have a simple day-night cycle. I mean, shit, games from back in the PS2 era were doing NPCs that had day and night cycles, and that makes the world feel so much more realistic compared to this, where they're just standing there, either fucking bumbling around or standing there in T-poses when they aren't doing anything. And the biggest example I've got as far as something that would just take me out of the game, and I'll cite a very specific example. There's a side mission where you have to visit somebody's mansion, and as you're walking away from the side quest after you complete it in this guy's mansion, there's another NPC that walks out with you. He gets into his car and he drives off. That's supposed to be like the scripted version of what's supposed to happen. Instead, the guy got into his car, drove onto the road, but the pathfinding screwed up to where he turned the car into the middle of the road and stopped his car dead center and was blocking the two lanes that were coming towards him. Sure enough, two cars started coming on each side of the lane and stopped because they couldn't figure out how to simply get around this guy's car. So rather than the guy that was the NPC that was in the car making a fucking turning around and getting out of the way, it was just stuck there. And then you have all these other cars in both lanes that are building up over time. And I literally stood there and I watched for 10 minutes as these lines of cars started to appear because one car couldn't figure out to move a few degrees and get out of the way. And they didn't do anything. They didn't react at all to this guy blocking them in the street. They didn't honk. They didn't flip him off. They didn't tell him to fuck off or start swearing at him. Like, nothing. It was just dead. It was just the world just came to a standstill. And I just sat there and watched it and just went, wow. And I just sadly shook my head. I got on my motorcycle and just drove off. I was stunned by how bad it was. And it reminds me of the exact thing I said about Final Fantasy VII Remake's pseudo-open worlds. They feel like dioramas. But to Final Fantasy VII's Remake's credit, at least even in that game, that had way more optional stuff you could partake in that made the world feel just a tiny bit more alive. Because the lack of interactable things and minigames in Cyberpunk is shocking. In Cyberpunk, you can't play arcade games, You can't invite companions out to drink. You can't play bar games like darts or pool. There's no taxi or train system to speak of. You can't easily buy new cars or apartments. The whole process for that is a gigantic pain. You can't pick up anyone from a bar and have one-night stands. You can't sing karaoke. You can't do drugs and get addicted. You can't install any cyberware that offers fun and wacky optional side quests like, I don't know, like a gigantic elephant-sized cock or something. I don't know, just something silly like that. You can't race cars outside of a dedicated side quest. You can't go into a store and rob it dynamically like in GTA 5, and the list just goes on and on. It's so limited in what you can do that you can't even customize V and their apartment. You can't even get a haircut in this game. One of the supposedly most interactive open worlds out there doesn't even give you the option to visit a barber and get a haircut. Just, wow. It just looks so bad compared to the recently released, like something recently released like Yakuza 7, which Yakuza 7 offers a large variety of extra things to do in that city, and Cyberpunk is such a flat line compared to that. It's so bereft of content compared to that. And I would say this world has the interactivity of something like a Disneyland ride or Disneyland scenery, but Disneyland scenery lets you interact with it more than anything in Cyberpunk. Look, I'm not expecting Red Dead 2 level of immersion and extreme attention to detail, but come on. Like I think like I said, I think Cyberpunk's open world pales in comparison to games from the PS2 era. I can easily think of a few games from the PS2 era that feel more immersive, like San Andreas, Writing Out a Story, Vice City, Dragon Quest 8. I mean, that's terrible. Cyberpunk is just all gloss, no substance. Moving on from that, the gameplay. It's a combination of the spectrum ranges from adequate to outright awful. And that's the dilemma that I face with Cyberpunk. Because I'll admit, as some kind of semi-interactive movie, I like Cyberpunk quite a bit. But as a game, it kind of sucks. And I kept thinking about something the late great Total Biscuit once said about gameplay. And look, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he once said something along the lines of, no matter how impressive everything else is, if the gameplay sucks, then it has failed as a video game. And I kept thinking about that line playing Cyberpunk, because none of the gameplay really feels all that well thought out or fun to use, aside from just simply running around and quickly shooting people in the head with an overpowered shotgun and pretending you're like John Wick or something. That's fun, to an extent. Much hyped stuff like hacking, cybernetics, stealth, weapon modding, they all really lack polish and are a pain in the ass to use thanks to the terrible UI and menus, where it just feels like no quality of life features were implemented to make them as fun to use and streamlined as possible. All the process for acquiring them and using them always feels like it's just like one or two steps too many. And stealth and hacking are particular disappointments, because I wanted to build my character to be this stealthy person. I wanted to rely on my wits and charm and intelligence more than just straight up murdering people in cold blood. But I had to give up on that kind of playthrough because the stealth just straight up sucks. And stealth is not a viable option in this game because it has the exact same problem that Deus Ex Human Revolution had, the original version of it, where if you're trying to go for a stealthy playthrough, you get thrown into these boss fights, and especially if you're playing on the higher difficulties, you're fucked if you haven't put any stats in combat or swords or guns or whatever. You can't use stealth against these guys. And the stealth itself just feels generations behind things like Dishonored, the aforementioned Deus Ex, Watch Dogs, and even the original PS1 and PS2 Metal Gear Solid games. But you can easily avoid dealing with a lot of shit like that if you just want to get through the game by being a cold-blooded murderer. However, what you can't avoid if you want to complete everything are things like driving and hand-to-hand combat, which driving is just straight up bad. No matter what vehicle you drive, and they never feel quite right, and sometimes it always feels like you're either controlling a car that has no physics whatsoever or a tank in the form of a small car. And at its very worst, it was giving me Watch Dogs 1 flashbacks. That's not a good thing if y'all remember my Watch Dogs 1 rant. And when you get the best cars in the game, ironically, some of the most, tricked out, best, most expensive cars in the game, they feel like you're driving paper. Like paper mache car. They have no weight at all. They suck. So it makes acquiring these really cool, tricked out cars just it's such blue balls. I hated it. And what's even worse, oh my god, it's the hand-to-hand combat, which is atrocious. The hand-to-hand combat in this game is a crime against humanity. It's easily the worst hand-to-hand combat I've ever experienced in a game. Ever. If you thought the hand-to-hand combat in a Bethesda game was bad, oh boy, just wait until you see it in Cyberpunk. Nothing about it feels even remotely playable, and it makes the side missions dedicated to fighting people via this method of combat it's like you're bashing your face against a brick wall trying to deal with it. It's so unbearably horrible that I couldn't bring myself to finish the multi-part side quests dedicated to those fighting matches, similar to the Witcher 3's. They should have just scrapped this system altogether. Just forget hand-to-hand combat. Get rid of it. It sucks. And speaking of things that they should have scrapped, the loot system. It doesn't quite have the same blatant level gating gear score stuff along the lines of Destiny or The Division or Avengers or Anthem or however many you can think of. But it has something like that. Granted, The Witcher 3 had something like this due to it being an RPG and you leveling up Geralt. And obviously some stuff on the map is locked off because it's for higher leveled players. However, like everything else in Cyberpunk, this format just feels half-baked. It's terrible to navigate, again, because of the bad UI, and the game never really gives you a chance to get attached to certain weapons and armor because of how overwhelmingly often you're receiving new and better stuff. And I don't think there's any kind of transmodding in the game, so you can't take the stats of weapons that you really don't want cosmetically and apply them to weapons that you do want that have better perks. There's nothing like that in this game. And it also makes exploring the world not that much fun in the beginning when you find random encounters, because some of them have enemies that are basically unkillable bullet sponges until you artificially increase your pseudo gear score. And the cosmetics in this game are terrible. Terrible cosmetics. I don't think, aside from a few really shitty, fully customizable outfits, that there is no way to truly customize V's outfit to your liking. You can't add any kind of personal touch to V unless you luckily stumble upon some combination of clothes that have the high enough stats that you need to survive, and then you luckily mix and match them together to where it doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look like something like Lady Gaga threw out of her closet and it just landed on top of you. I don't know. It does not look good. None of the cosmetics they don't look good. And also, my final point, one of the more shockingly mediocre and undercooked aspects of the game are its RPG mechanics and how they mostly lack any kind of influence on the story. Again, it feels like they're just generation behind other games. Like Fallout New Vegas, it's buggy as hell. It's kind of ugly, but it's incredibly deep as an RPG, and it's a lot of fun to engage with. But I feel like in Cyberpunk they had more in the works, but they just had to scrap it in favor of all this other crap that they shoved in. Because things like your chosen life path, all that shit barely matters at all outside of an exclusive prologue, and some extra dialogue options here and there that don't really change anything. They're just flavored dialogue. That's it. The dialogue was honestly, it was giving me Fallout 4 flashbacks. And some of the dialogue choices, like most of them, they boil down to a couple things. They boil down to yes, yes with life path or high stats flavoring, no, some optional dialogue that goes nowhere, or optional dialogue that goes nowhere even if you unlock it via a life path or a high enough stat. It's only in very rare cases that you feel like the stats that you pour into certain, like the points you pour into certain stats really matter in the long run. But most cases they don't. And a lot of these missions that require, like some of these missions that will offer those options, they're completely missable. And it's also not really, like, as far as the main stuff, it's not really until the finale of the game where it feels like where it actually feels like something you say to somebody actually matters and has narrative consequences. And like I said earlier, I wanted to build my character to be this charismatic, intelligent person. But I never really felt like pouring stats into things like cool or intelligence really did anything other than give me optional dialogue here and there, and most of it just didn't do anything anyway. Like I said, you don't even get extra XP when you choose a dialogue choice that is unlocked via a stat you poured points into. Fucking Fallout 3 did that. And it made it all the more rewarding when you would get these little bits of extra XP when you poured stats into something you're dedicating your playthrough to. Stuff like that is cool. It's encouraging. It's not here in Cyberpunk. And when it was all said and done at the very end, I never felt like I had any complete agency over how I crafted V or his story. It just... And again, I have to wonder if CDPR had more plans to flesh out the RPG systems, but they just didn't have enough time for it, and they scaled them down to work on the other aspects. It's such a waste. It's such a waste of potential with a lot of this, and that's ultimately the design flaw at the heart of Cyberpunk 2077. It's far too little spread out over far too much. And it's like, it reminded me a lot of what Bilbo says in Fellowship of the Ring when he states that he feels like butter scraped over too much bread. That's exactly what Cyberpunk 2077 is, because it has way too much going on. It has too many gameplay and design systems, and CDPR spent far too little time developing each and every one of them. What it should have done is chosen one or two systems, preferably the RPG and open world elements, and ran to the hills, making sure they were as deep, interactive, and rewarding as they possibly could have been. I would have gladly taken a hit in graphical fidelity and the number of NPCs on screen if it meant we got much more depth in this world. Everything this game is trying to do has been done much, much better before. Do you want an open world game that realistically reacts to your behavior? Play Red Dead 2. Do you want a great narrative story with hard choices and memorable characters? Play The Witcher 3. Do you want a fun loot game with gear scores and cosmetics? Destiny 2 has you covered. Do you want a first-person stealth game? Play Dishonored. Do you want a cyberpunk-flavored action game with different playstyles? Play Deus Ex Human Revolution. Do you want to run around in an open world and cause chaos and blow shit up? GTA has been the king of that for decades. Literal decades. The sad part is, like I said, there is something interesting at the very heart of Cyberpunk 2077. In any other scenario, I would recommend it if you were able to get it for maybe $40-50 at launch, just to experience the few amazingly high points Cyberpunk has. Because I do think it's worth forking over cash for those amazing high points. But, based on what it is, and definitely based on how it launched, I can't recommend Cyberpunk 2077 at all. I never thought I'd be saying that. I figured out of all the games, aside from Persona 5 Royal that were to come out this year, I figured Cyberpunk was going to be the safest bet to be good, or at least great, but it's not. It's one of the biggest disappointments of this entire console generation. It's such a gigantic misfire after something like The Witcher 3 came out and just floored everyone. And man, CDPR just, wow, I'm just shocked by how they've turned from a widely adored, beloved publisher/developer to like a mockery of itself overnight, practically overnight. But if you're still interested in playing Cyberpunk 2077 after everything I've said, I strongly encourage you to wait at least 9 months before trying it out. Just have some patience. Just wait. Wait a year. 9 months is maybe the least I'd wait, but a year would probably be better. Trust me, it will be a far better experience 9 months from now. And you'll be able to get it for far cheaper compared to how it launched as well. You might even be able to get that collector's edition for cheap if there are still copies around. So, that's Cyberpunk 2077. Whoever is calling this a masterpiece and saying it's one of the most immersive games in recent memory, yeah, I don't know what to say. Because I can understand looking at some other games that have come out this year that I'm not crazy in love with, like Hades, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I can understand looking at those and calling those masterpieces. I get it. I understand it. But I don't understand calling Cyberpunk 2077 as it launched a masterpiece. Like, do y'all really have, like, and I'm not talking about you guys watching, the audience. I'm talking about YouTube influencers and game critics. Do you guys really have that low of standards to where something as buggy and half-baked as this comes out and it's just showered with acclaim? It's worthy of all these 9s and 10s? Like, really? This is worthy of a 10? Are you serious? Wow. Alrighty. So, thank you all for watching. If you like what you see, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of Cyberpunk 2077 if you played it. And as always, I am Razorblade Mango. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.